So what do you know? It's 8:17 on a Friday, and here I am. Just finishing up some social media work, and waiting for my son to give me a call to pick him up. But crazy, yeah. Yeah, it's. I posted something on my page either last night or early this morning, and it was really quite interesting. It's all kind of based on perception, our perception of each other. So basically, my opinion of me, my self-concept, is partially based on my idea around what I think you think of me, and because the fact that I'm so concerned of what you think, what I think you think of me, that I'll alter my behavior accordingly. And that's kind of strange. God, we're freaking complicated. So think about it, so my self-concept is partially based or largely based on what I think you think of me. And because I'm concerned about what I think you think of me, it alters my behavior, so there's no true me in the context of the conversation. Right? How weird is that? We are 95%, if not more, unconscious to ourselves. It's there's an interesting term being thrown around. We throw around lots of terms, right? And I guess I'm just guilty as anyone else when I find something that an idea that excites me or a term that excites me, and the term is called being woke. Are you a woke person? Are you woken up? And I don't think it's that. I don't think we're that woke. Right? I don't think, I think we're so unconscious so much of the time. And I guess the challenge is how do you become conscious? Right? How do you decide to become conscious? And being conscious is going to look different in different parts of your life, right? So how do you become conscious? And all I've been able to kind of figure out over the years is the only way to become conscious is to decide beforehand. Oh man, thanks, brother. Man, God, dude, I'm certainly trying, but there's a whole lot of dead wood still burn off on this and this body. God, it but here's the interesting thing. Here's the piece, and I've been talking about this a lot, right? And it's the base premise to the program that I generate called the I Am Project, which a lot of you have heard about. And what we've been doing is exploring the possibility on maybe we explore the conversation around hidden identities. And what I mean by hidden identity is that we know that what drives us is unconscious. We know that 90% of the stuff that goes through our mind, we would never actually ever have it written in. We'd never take our thoughts and never allow them to be transcribed and to be, read out to the world. So the last 30 days of all your thoughts, all of them, right? If would you allow them to be transcribed and then just submit it on Facebook as a PDF? There's no freaking way you'd ever do that. So we're afraid of the bouts of insanity and cruelty that run through our mind. We're terrified of it. And we wonder what does that mean of us? What does that mean that we think those things? What does it mean that we have that evil thought? What does it mean? It's just, and so we're so terrified of those things that show up inside of us that we quickly stuff it down because, oh my God, it just, I'm a good person. How could I have those thoughts? Well, Carl Jung I put forth this idea around calling, he talked about integrating the dark or integrating the shadow. And the shadow is the stuff that really terrifies you about who you are. And coming to grips with the fact that those random bits of humanity, the dark part of humanity, those random bits that, yeah, of course, I mean, Lindy, you know, absolutely. But we're ashamed because of why. You know, we have the chaos in the back of our mind. It's a part of what we are. It's a part of who we are. We know, you know, we've often heard, and this is a Carl Jungian statement as well, that, you know, what really pisses me off about you, right, when I see in you, is in me. That's why it makes me angry. I'm just deflecting it because I choose not to see that what you're doing is also part of me. It offends me because it's in me. And I dislike the I dislike the fact that it's being mirrored back to me, right? So it's quite often a reflection, and things that really are most abhorrent that we see in the world, there's a little bit of that in us. I mean, if you read, you know, if you go through, and I haven't read them, I've just listened to people that talk about these books I've read. So books on the, I think there's a book called Ordinary People, or Ordinary Men. And it's not a movie series, but it was about a group of German soldiers that were in Poland, and they were asked to just go and police a certain area of Poland, but the atrocities, like taking pregnant women out into the field and executing them, they were never told to do any of these things. These are ordinary men, and somehow they stayed behind, and this evolved out of them, right? This process, this monstrous behavior just evolved out of them. But the thing is, it's in all of us, right? You know, and we could never think about, you know, why would, you know, I would never do that. But all through history, you know, good people have done some really horrific things. And it's not saying that, I guess the, you know, the space we need to enter into is that we realize we are capable of monstrous things. We are capable of just horrible things. All of us, you and me, are capable. One of the examples was given by one of my, one of my intellectual favorites, Dr. Jordan Peterson, and he said, you know, if you're a parent, right? If you're a parent, you need to know that you are a monster. You have the capability of really harming a child, and you need to, you know, if you don't get in touch with your emotions, if you don't really contend with the fact that you can get really angry and you can become violent and you can actually hurt your child. If you don't think that's possible, man, then, you know, he says, you're delusional, because a lot of really good people actually harm their children because they don't contend with this stuff that's going on inside them. There's no way to process it for so many people. They haven't learned the art of it. And so much of that structure has been removed from our society that, we're little powder kegs because we don't have a natural philosophical and a cultural way to offload and to be in a supportive conversation, right? I know even with my son, one of the, I had to contend with it because as he was getting bigger, he was getting more angry and more defiant, right? Just kind of pushing his ground. And I had to, what I did is I brought the bad man, I call him the bad man. I brought this angry guy, I brought him up to about here, about chest height. And I could feel. So I bring this really, this is not going to end well for you kind of guy. And, I knew I had this, this dark part of who I am, right? It's just, I know that I could kill somebody. I don't think that's I don't even question the fact that that's even remotely possible. I know it is. I know it's possible for all of us. Because we have these things that run through our head, and it, like I said, scares the shit out of us. But it doesn't mean that we're going to act on it. It's just a wandering thought. And again, I'll finish the story about my son, and I'll get to that point. The idea of bringing this anger up here. Yeah, actually, in one of his last shows, right, bringing the anger up here, and my son could feel it. He could feel this. He could look at me, and he knew, he had a sense that things were not going to turn out well for him if he didn't back off. But what I wanted to be able to teach him is that the world can be a potentially dangerous place. And every time he made a fist down by his side, trying to provoke me, I grabbed a hold of him and I just squeezed the shit out of him. And he'd get mad and he'd freak out and I'd apply more pressure. It wasn't hitting him, but I want to let him know that he's potentially helpless. And that every time he makes a fist, I would grab him, I'd take him down. Because if he does it in a bar, right, around people that, well, don't care for his well-being, like me, I love my son, I don't want somebody to shoot him or 5 guys to beat him to death. And so what integrating the shadow, what there's a real benefit to it, to recognize it and learning how to integrate it, is that it makes you strong. It actually makes you, it gives you a backbone. It makes you tough. The danger of actually, and again, I'm not a psychologist of this stuff, so, but I practice it inside myself, and there's many areas in my life where, man, I need some shadow. I need to be a lot tougher in some parts of my life. And around myself, right? Getting myself to do things. But it's the integrating that shadow actually makes you a little bit dangerous, right? It makes you're not a pushover. That makes you strong, right? And it's not a bad thing to be able to pull a little bit of that, you're not going to mess with any kind of energy. So you have to find, there's utility in actually having that we call that negative energy. There's utility in actually having access to it. The problem is what happens when we don't. Well, the challenge is we don't learn to bring that energy inside of us and actually learn how to kind of befriend it and learn how to control it to some degree, is that we push it down, and we have a little bit too much of this, and somebody pushes their buttons and we have no control. We haven't had the dance with the shadow side of ourselves, and we do something very, very, very tragic and dangerous, and something that you can't take back. And that's one of the hazards of actually not contending with that angry part, that dangerous part, that shadow part of you. Yet we have to contend with it, and so it's interesting. And again, it goes back to the original start of the conversation around, around perceptions. One of the things I've been working on really hard for myself, and I've actually, yesterday I went back and started at the beginning, of going through the I Am Project process, is that just really, really defining specifically who I am, what I believe, what I stand for, right? And define it, like really define it. You can't say I'm a good person. It's so meaningless. It's just laughable. It doesn't say anything, right? You could be a passive person. You could be a weak person, and then you might think that's being a good person. Andy Andrews, in one of his books called The Traveler's Gift, at the end of his book, he always has this kind of Q&A. It was really interesting. He said something. It seemed a bit harsh, but it had some power to it. He said, we conceive ourselves as good people. I'm a good person. He says, well, you might just be spineless, right? How does that feel, right? Put that on. You think we're a good person. You just might be spineless, maybe a coward. And so your lack of capacity to have a backbone and stand up and have no character and not stand up for yourself or for the rights of others, just because you don't do anything wrong doesn't mean that you're good. It might mean that you're a coward. Ugh, like that. That was a hard one to listen to, right? Because where do you exchange, passivity, and we label it as being good, right? Because you're not going to make it through this lifetime without a backbone, without actually having some strength. And the areas that I get taken out in, or the areas that have a degree of cowardice and passivity, that's the areas where I think I can struggle the most. Areas that I'm confident is, areas that I actually have a backbone. There's some energy there, right? There's some strength, there's some power, there's some teeth, right? But it's, yeah. So, but what I was, the point I was getting at is that when you think about how do you organize all this stuff? Well, when I talked about values, truth being a value, and courage being a value, and love being a value, and define the meaning of it, and define the meaning of it, and also define the applicability of it. Like, so when you think about truth, right? So I went back to the I Am Project board. I started working on it again, and I started working on wellness, and what does wellness mean to me? And so I held wellness up to the lens of truth. And then I defined, what does it mean to me? And it's actually quite interesting. What wellness really means to me, of course, was, and And the reason why I started over is that, I'm in pretty good shape. I'm pretty healthy. I have a fairly good lifestyle. Like I don't, I'm not completely reckless. But if I was being truthful, and when I really analyzed it, what made me feel good was training hard, right? And just, and pushing it and just getting into the grind. And I love it. I was shooting some videos for a program called the 14-Day Shred that I'm going to launch next week. And I'm in the middle of these exercises, and I could feel the lactic acid building up inside my body. And it was going, and it got really uncomfortable. And so, and I thrive in that because all I did was simply just let my mind go blank. And I love the fact that I can actually feel that discomfort and put myself in that state and completely ignore it until I was done what I had to do. And why I love that is that why I love being in that space is that no, I'm not a masochist, and I don't have a wardrobe full of leather goods, right? Not quite like that. Why I put myself in that state is that life always offers challenges that are uncomfortable. And if I'm willing to purposely put myself in a state that is physically demanding, physically uncomfortable, I can access that state of being into different parts of my life. Right? Does that make sense? Like the samurai way. If you ever read stories with samurai warriors, they would often sleep on the floor. They would actually give themselves hardships. They would intentionally generate hardships for themselves, so they weren't completely shocked and surprised when hardships eventually came down the road, which they do, which is a big part of life. So they intentionally created hardships and tested themselves in the hardships so they became more resilient, right? I put myself in states of discomfort and exercise because I want the resiliency. I want to be stronger. I put myself in states of food deprivation, starvation, right? So 24 hours, 48 hours, 5 days. I do that because I don't want to be controlled by food. I don't want to be controlled by it, right? I want to teach my body how to contend with stress and how to recover. And what's so important about that is that psychologically, of course, it makes you way more robust because you get to deal with the stressors, which are many. You get to deal with that way more efficiently than somebody who always tiptoes around and always tries not to put themselves in states of stress. Exercise-wise, of course, it just, the idea of pushing yourself that hard is that, well, there's a few things. One, you're more physically resilient, and you need to be physically resilient because you live in a body, and if this body ain't working, your life ain't working, full stop, right? So you need to put yourself in those states of discomfort to achieve different levels of being. And the whole starvation piece, putting yourself in these fasting states where you deprive yourself of food, if you do it intentionally, one, you're not going to be controlled by food or controlled by the fridge, right? That's just, it's just not a good situation to start with. Two, it's also a psychological thing. Can you trust yourself? Can you trust your ability to withstand the stresses of life? Or are you just going to fold, right? So, fasting, training in lactic acid thresholds, right? Those type of things. Put yourself in those positions. Ice cold showers, right? Ice baths, right? Sitting in saunas at like 200 degrees. The body is designed for it. Psychologically, we're designed for it. We're designed for stress and recovery, right? That's what we're wired for. And when we don't stress ourselves, let's back up a little bit. For most of our life, for millennia, like for thousands of years, that was our reality. Food deprivation, hard physical labor, cold temperatures, extremely hot environments, depending where you lived, right? Life was just hammering humans. Just got hammered. And guess what? We learned to be resilient. The body is designed it is designed to live in the ebb and flow of stress and recovery. That's the design. And when we don't consciously, because we have to actually do it consciously now, if we don't consciously put ourselves in a state of food deprivation, physical stressors, right, heat and hot and cold stressors, we don't purposely do that, intentionally do that, we don't survive, we don't do well, right? Like mentally stress ourselves. It's why we were created, it seems, right? But it was a natural part of our environment for most of our existence, except for the last 100 years or so. So we have to reproduce exercise or reproduce manual labor in the form of exercise. right? Because you don't have to farm. You don't have to chop trees down. You don't have to put wood in the wood burning fireplace or put wood in the the wood stove. I remember my grandmother doing that. We're not out in the garden, right? With a hoe out there digging away, digging away, digging away. We don't have to do those things anymore. But we have to replace them with something, because if we don't, we will simply suffer. We will. And we'll suffer due to lack of physical stimulus, lack of mental stimulus, lack of stressors to our metabolism in the form of fasting and that sort of thing. It's just, we got it all wrong. It's kind of like George Jetson. Remember the Jetsons? George Jetson, they got it all wrong. We were not supposed to make things easier. We were supposed to control the risk of death. But we're supposed to make things easier. It's not what we're good at. It's not good for us at all, at any level. Right? Kind of crazy, right? But if you're honest with yourself and you look at the span of history, how long we've been around, it's just been an ass whooping from day one. And we have this thing, and we try to bring everybody and protect them, right? We try to protect everyone, and we can't. You got to stand up for yourself. We have to stand up for ourselves. And if we're smart, we'll come together with big conversations, and we'll create a community. And then inside that community, we'll stand up for each other. Inside that community, of course, but even within the community, it's not like we can't be dragging people along. You got to want to survive. You got to want to be alive. You got to want to participate, right? You got to want to live. And we create a society that's so weird, and conversations like these, kind of be careful how far you kind of push the conversation, because people say, well, you don't know my story. Well, 100 years ago, your story wouldn't have mattered. Right? Nobody would care about your story. But now we're in the story generation. Everybody's got a story. I was talking to a good friend of mine in back east, and she's going to be part of our taking our clinical training in the I Am project. And and we were talking about stories, and I said, Jesus, like, you're going to tell me you're going to show me somebody who doesn't have a story? Man, if you got a birth certificate, somebody's screwed with you, pretty much guaranteed. And it's not invalidating that what happens to people is not tragic and unfortunate. It's just common. Like, it's super common. There's not too many people I can talk to that if I just scratch beneath the surface a little bit, that there isn't a whole litany of tragedies and just chaos and deaths and abuse and bankruptcy and divorce and abandonment. Like, Jesus, it's life. That part's obvious, and we've beaten that to death. And I don't think it serves us anymore. We've beaten the conversation to death. But what we haven't decided is that despite that being normal, unfortunately, but it's normal. Tell me it's not, right? Tell me that's not normal. Right? It's absolutely normal. It's tragic, it's unfortunate, but it's normal. So if we kind of push that aside and say, okay, tragedy is normal. But what's not normal is that what we've lost are these cultural and spiritual practices that we had for generations. And I've talked about this before quite often, I think. And we've lost the ability to communicate with each other and those cultural connections that we by necessity we had to survive together. We had to band together. We had to share. We had to. Otherwise, we never survive. And now we can isolate ourselves. Like like for 3 months, we cut ourselves off from everyone else, and we didn't really need anyone. Right? That's not normal. Like, we need each other. And we look at different cultures. I remember, that people, saying, well, it's just these foreigners come over and, take all the good jobs, like driving taxis and, what have you. And people used to complain about, these neighborhoods, whether it be Vietnamese or East Indians coming in. And they said, and people complain about them. I says, well, no, the families are intelligent. The whole family moves in and they combine the resources, they support each other, they work hard, they realize that they do better as a unit rather than an individual, right? And then they go through and they pay off one house and they buy the next one, and like, super smart. Like, it's the way things always used to be. It's just, we just had this really weird idea. that, I want my own house, my own car, my own money, my own space, and then we wonder why we're alone. Well, right? Why do you think? Oh, man. And I talked about this stuff more, not to the point of trying to educate you, but trying to remind me. And so since I'm trying to remind me, I may as well remind myself, having a glass of wine, talking to people at a distance. Yeah, yes, absolutely. More culture, more collaboration, and connections. Well, I even find in business. So my friend Diane, she reached out to me after I met Diane actually many years ago in a retreat in Belize at David Woods Island, and I met her and some other fine folks there. And many years later, we started collaborating. Right, we collaborated because Diane had access to. She was a travel agent, had a travel company, and so we started. She suggested I do a retreat in this hotel chain called Charisma, and we had this amazing retreat with 15 people. It's just a mind-blowing experience for everyone. It was just so grateful to be there and actually had this conversation. But just 5 days intense conversation. It was so amazing, and people came up with this just mentally awestruck on what they were discovering. And I wasn't telling people how to live. I'm not giving people advice saying, I'm not a life coach. I'm assuming that you know what the fuck you're supposed to be doing. You don't know why you're not doing it, and that's why we're upset. Hey, listen, the stuff that just takes me out, it takes me out because I know what I'm supposed to be doing, but I don't know why I'm not, and I don't understand where the buffers are coming from. That's the exploration, not another freaking book. Sorry. But I mean, really, how many books do you need on the same topic? If you have more than 10 personal development books and things haven't changed, do you need another 10 books? Or maybe do you need to do what the first book said? And I became curious because that was my issue for many years, right? In around, just reading. It's amazing. I love it. We're putting out quotes. It's great information. And we're doing like 0.01% of what the book said. So why doesn't it land? And I took this page from the Bible. I study Christianity. I study philosophy and as much as I can to my degree of understanding. But I like pulling abstracts out of it because again, it's some very old material, ancient material, so there's some value. And I remember there was this conversation. So think about this. You imagine the story about Moses and the Israelites and Egypt. Remember the story? So basically, the Israelites left. They left Egypt, the tyranny of Egypt, crossed the Red Sea, right? Anyhow, so imagine this. I'm not sure what the numbers are. Let's say there's 40,000 Israelites, right? 40,000 Israelites wander around the desert, right? All kind of crazy and they've just been released from tyranny, and now they have all these rules. So there's a book of the Bible called Leviticus, and it's just like the book of rules. It's just like so many rules. It's insane, so many rules. And so the question was, well, when should we study the rules? The rules to life, right? The rules to conduct. And I think this is in the book of Deuteronomy. Again, I'm reading this stuff because I find all this material fascinating. And again, think about books like the Bible that's been around for thousands of years, probably something interesting there that we should extract that's probably valuable. But what was interesting, he said, well, when should you study this, right? When you wake up, when you break for bread, when you go for a walk, right? Before you go to sleep. This is when you should study these laws, all these laws that they laid out for the Israelites. And I thought about that, and really why it struck me interesting is that, so here you are, let's say there's 40,000 of you and your best friends, you're all the same culture, right? You eat the same food, you got the same belief systems. And despite all that being the same, all the sameness of that, they were still told the only way you're going to toe the line is that if you make this a daily practice, right? That's why we call it spiritual practice, because it's practice, right? Right? Medical practice, because it's practice. And so when you take your personal development, it's not personal development. It should be a practice, because the development is actually more like just electroplating the problem. But it's actually not really a practice, because you're just reading from one book to the next, to the next, to the next. And it's not, it's, the knowledge is there up here, but it's actually not deep enough. It's not deep enough to make a difference. We're trying to bury this information into the recesses of our mind so it actually has a conformational change in our behavior. Eric from Australia, my brother, how are you doing, my friend? Jesus, I haven't seen you forever. That's an interesting piece, right? So I have the one book, let's say, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And I have it on my desk, and I go through it probably, 3 or 4 times a week. Because there's so many things I can take it. I can read that book for the next year and not extract every bit of value out of that book, right? Because it's a study, it's a practice. I'm practicing what this guy said. I'm practicing what he read, and I'm in the practice of actually pulling this stuff forward. This is a practice, right? I don't do this a whole lot because people get bored to tears of listening to me ramble on, but I do it because it's a practice, and the practice of talking about the things that I believe in. I'm not saying it's true, but the things that I believe and I think are important to me. And so I practice thinking and talking about them so they make sense. So I can actually start clarifying the thought process or clarifying what's going on inside my head, right? It's just a practice. And I'm pretty consistent. I don't deviate too far off course with what I think and believe and what I'm trying to think about. I'm fairly consistent because there's a very particular lens that I've adopted to try to look through the world at. And the more I refine that lens, the more I decide what that is, and the more clear the images I'm going to pull in, the more likely I'm going to be able to see and to recognize the different things, character strengths, and the values that are going to be necessary to give me the life that I want. It's just it's like Christianity, right? So it's just you can say the word, but there's a lot of depth to that statement. And Jordan Peterson, again, I mentioned before, and he's always challenged about people say, well, do you believe in God? Because he actually talks about spirituality a lot. He talks about the Bible a lot. He said, Jesus, the book's been around forever, and it's built into our legal system, right? The book's built into our legal system. It's built into our entire Western civilization. So probably not a bad idea to see what the book is saying, right? But he keeps being challenged. Well, do you believe in God? And he keeps kind of dodging the issue. He said, well, one, it's personal, and 2, I don't know what you mean by believe. Did this 2-hour lecture, and at the end of it, basically he said, you need to be very careful uttering the proclamation that I believe in God, because there's a heavy weight to that statement. Because you better have your life in order, right? If you're going to toss that out as a what they call it, potential virtue signaling, right? Saying I believe in God, there's a meaning underneath it. There's an inferred meaning to that statement, and that's a big statement, right? When I say I'm a Christian, in order for that to have any power, I mean, there's a lot of weight to that statement, like massive amount of weight to that statement, and it's challenging. So we throw around these labels, especially in the modern culture. And I'm not denigrating Christians, but I'm just saying when you utter something, it's just, you better know what it is. And you better actually, you better understand the depth of the meaning of that, because to throw words around casually is challenging, right? And it's risky. Because all of a sudden you take something that has potential strength and utility and benefit to people, and if you just water it down by just launching around as a casual offhand statement, you kind of kill the power behind it, right? And that's why we find so many things that people don't care anymore. People are kind of religion, Christianity, we're big chunk of the world's over it, right? We're over lots of things, right? Because we hear the conversation, but we don't often see the behavior. And again, it's a broad, sweeping statement, which is unfortunate, because there's a lot of beautiful Christians out there that I know, and they are very profoundly connected to their faith. But it's but it's people that use those terms casually. I think it creates the problem. Anyhow, well, I've run out of brain cells, and so. Yeah, that's all I got to say, man. I don't know where else to go, but yeah. So getting back to I'll finish by repeating what I said in the beginning. So my opinion of me is partially generated by what I think you think of me, and how I think you think of me alters my behavior. No, I haven't. Right? So what I think you think of me determines how I think of myself. And the fact that I am so concerned and I had this idea of how you think of me alters my perception of me, which alters my behavior, which really doesn't give me a life at all. Right? It's just it's blind. It's a blind way to be. And I'm really happy to say that there's certain parts of my life that I have great clarity, and there's other parts of my life, man, the veil still needs to come off, I'm telling you. But that's why we have, that's why we given a certain amount of time to actually have this conversation, right? And that's why it's important. And, there's parts I'm struggling with right now. I'm struggling with it because it seems like there's a set of perceptual filters or ideas or beliefs that are really deeply entrenched that I'm having a hard time unraveling and getting rid of, right? So we're all in the same boat together. But thank you for entertaining me in these conversations. I appreciate it. And again, like I said, you have to be willing, you have to have the courage and be willing to be wrong. But the more I talk about this, because this is really selfish. I'm kind of doing it for me because I need to hear this stuff. But talking to myself just would seem crazy. The neighbors would think I've lost my mind. Maybe I have. But for me to talk it out and then to reflect it against you and then have you go, well, that kind of makes sense. Or Jesus jokes, lay off the sauce, right? But that's the way we find our way through the world, right? We utter things, we behave in certain ways, and then it's reflected back to us by your response. And if we get a positive response, we know, okay, well, maybe that wasn't so bad. If I get a negative response and all of a sudden I'm blocked and lost 100 friends, 10 minutes later, then I know it was the wrong thing to say. So that's the way we learn. Anyhow, guys, have a great weekend. I'm out. I got to finish my wine. All right, take care.